Coming up on Dr. Kiki Science Hour, we're talking about planet Earth on Earth Day with the .Earth blogger for the New York Times, Andrew Revkin. That's coming up on Dr. Kiki Science Hour.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Dr. Kiki's Science Hour is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Dr. Kiki's Science Hour with Dr. Kiki, episode 92, recorded on Thursday, April 21st, 2011. The State of the Earth. This episode of Dr. Kiki's Science Hour is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes, movies, and more streamed to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs by mail in about one business day. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Kiki Science Hour, and I'm Dr. Kiki. I'd like to welcome you to the show that's one expert, 1 hour, one topic. And today we're going to dig into the topic of planet Earth. Tomorrow is Earth Day, and in honor of Earth Day, I thought it would be a great topic to talk about. You know, what's going on environmentally? What's happening in terms of big disasters scientifically, politically, and in the science reporting field? So in that vein, additionally, I would like to say as well, this week is the 1 year anniversary of the Gulf oil spill as well. So hopefully we'll get into that topic during the show. But in that vein, I've invited Andy Revkin. He is the .Earth blogger from the New York Times. He's a journalist and an author who spent a quarter of a century covering subjects ranging from the assault on the Amazon to the Asian tsunami, from the troubled relationship of science and politics to climate change and the North Pole. From 1995 through 2009, he covered the environment for the New York Times and is currently a senior fellow at the Pace Academy for Applied Environmental Studies at Pace University and continues to write the .Earth blog for the Times op-ed section. Previous jobs include senior editor positions at both Discover Magazine and Science Digest. All this according to Wikipedia. He is also a talented musician, so hopefully we'll get him to talk a little bit about that. And beyond that, it says online that he strives to report the truth. Andy, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
It's good to be on.
It's great to have you. You've been reporting on environmental issues, earth-based issues for years, and I thought it appropriate to get you on the show this week to kind of talk summarily, kind of summarize your views on what you see going on now and how it differs from, you know, previous Earth days that you've been reporting through. Do you see any big changes that have come and gone?
Yeah, I think what I'm starting to see after, I can't believe it's coming up on like 30 years of science writing and then more and more on the environment, is a shift both in my own thinking and in where I would think there are solutions to the problem of how do we fit human aspirations, which are kind of infinite, on a finite planet. Back in the 20th century, which seems to be an increasingly long time ago, of course, there was mostly a woe is me, shame on you sort of take on the environment. People were who were concerned about degradation of ecosystems or shifts in the climate system and other problems that were sort of subtle, were pushing really hard to get attention, because many of these issues are not like a tsunami. They're very, which is the ultimate sort of news story. They're slow and they come along like what I call on .Earth slow drip problems. Just a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, and then it's like, oh, how did that happen? And what I've come to understand is that after writing, I'd say the first 25 years of my journalism on these subjects was really focused on the outer external physical and biological world, on rainforests, on people's relationships to resources, and increasingly, as I've dug in on human nature, what makes us perceive certain problems and react to them effectively, and what makes us inured to or ignore other kinds of problems until after the fact, and then we look around and go, how did that happen? And so it's more and more for me a focus on the inner environment. What is it about our nature, our human nature, the inner nature of humanity that makes some of these issues tough? Now that leads me in a couple of directions. One is that, oh my God, information doesn't always matter, which is sort of a bummer for a journalist to come to a realization that information doesn't always matter. In fact, often doesn't matter. You could even say almost all the time doesn't matter. And then to say, okay, then what? And one reason I'm at Pace University now, not just writing for the Times, although I still do every day, is I'm trying to get a better sense of, as my title, I made up my title, the Senior Fellow for Environmental Understanding. What I'm trying to do is work more on how do you get information to matter, and what can you learn about human behavior that can give you a better shot at that. And the other thing I've gotten inspired by is our innovative capacity, our capacity to surprise ourselves in positive ways sometimes is remarkable. You know, there are many troubling aspects of what's going on the planet right now, but there's an incredible amount of progress that's been made. There's more and more people moving out of poverty, even though we still have 2 billion people cooking on firewood and dung and living really horrible lives. Not to, when I don't mean deprivation, but lives of premature mortality, lives that have no real quality. And so that leads me again toward, I've just become much more focused on new ways to sort of move forward.
Were you interested in the human interest side of things when you first started reporting? Was that what got you into the environmental journalism, science journalism area?
I grew up loving science. I grew up in Rhode Island, and I think my first real experiences of sort of wonder and excitement were in the natural world, going skin diving in the summer and parts of the Rhode Island coast, where the narrow river there, where I saw a scallop for the first time, doing this sort of clap, clap, clap swimming. I'd never seen a mollusk swim, and that got my attention. I saw all the little blue eyes, and then Jacques Cousteau. I grew up watching his show on TV and reading his books, and he got me all excited about storytelling, not through every medium, writing as well as photography and film. And that all stuck with me. Although when I went to college, I really mainly wanted to be a scientist. At least that's what I thought. Marine biologist. And then when I took organic chemistry, I started to realize that, to get a PhD, to really dig in on some single subject in science didn't feel quite like me. And I was lucky enough to get a fellowship that took me overseas for a while after college. And I saw the marvels of the world, a big swath of it, and came back wanting to tell stories, and that's what led me to journalism. In your journalism,
and you say online that you strive to report the truth, that it's the truth and facts that are interesting to you. You mentioned earlier, though, that more and more it's, and I believe there was an article by Chris Mooney this last week in Mother Jones that kind of spoke to this. It's that science is based in facts, but people, they don't really care so much about the facts. There's a lot more of sway to emotion. And there are a lot of other things going into that. How is that affecting you now? You're moving into this area of public understanding and more academic pursuits, but at the same time, keeping your slow drip on the blog.
Well, I really do need a new category. The blog has these 4 categories of things I focus on. It's biodiversity, energy, poverty, and how you forge progress. But what I need is a category on human nature. And I think one thing that people, including myself, it's very hard to step out of your own reactions and your own reflexes and to realize that there is actually science-based understanding that there are a number of people in any community who will never see eye to eye on something. That you could argue day and night, you could throw studies at each other, about nuclear power or genetically modified organisms or the limits of organic agriculture, or the opposite side, and or the nature and risks from climate change, and that will not change things. And so I think without absorbing that fact, meaning the fact of the great variety of human responsiveness to risk, then you're kind of stuck. And that's actually established in research. There are these pretty remarkable studies in what's called cultural cognition, where if you hand somebody the same background document, if a friend gives a friend a report on global warming, and the person in the photograph in the article is changed. In other words, all the words, all the text is the same, but the picture, let's say, is someone in a suit and tie, and then some other person gets someone in Birkenstocks and flannel, that the reaction to the information is fundamentally different based on that little change. So that's something I need to convey. That's something I need to talk about, write about, not just about the conventional stories on striped bass or the nuclear power plant I just visited today, which was a remarkable and interesting experience.
You want to talk about that a little bit? I mean,
Sure.
Nuclear power is something that, as a result of the Fukushima plant and what's happening in Japan, it's on the top of the media's hit list recently.
Sure, and I've been writing a ton about this, including about the behavioral issues, because, I live about 10 miles away from the Indian Point nuclear power complex. There's 3 reactors there. 2 of them, only 2 are running. The first one was really a museum piece. It's one of the first atomic power plants built. It even has a fundamentally different shape. It was a different kind of reactor, different kind of fuel. And that one's literally mothballed now. And I went in. I spent almost 4 hours in the bowels of the plant. I hadn't been in since I wrote a big story about the restart of one of these power plants back in 1995. So for me, it was interesting to go back. And this time I got to go into the building that has the spent nuclear fuel in the big cooling pool. And it is a pretty weird feeling to be staring down in that green illuminated pool that has that plant's entire archive of spent fuel. You're looking down, all the fuel that was utilized to generate electricity from 1976 to now is still right there in the small, really about maybe 60 foot by 60 foot by 40 foot deep pool of water.
Wow. And it's just, it's easily, once you get inside, it's easily accessible, easily viewable. We've seen pictures of that also in Japan, the spent fuel being cooled in the cooling pools where fuel is stored after it's been used. Do you think that people's perspectives on nuclear technology here in the United States is moving in a positive direction? I mean, since 3 Mile Island here in the United States, we've made massive, I thought, positive changes in terms of the public's perception of nuclear power, more adoption, more acceptance of adoption of nuclear power. Now with what's happened in Japan, it seems like people are suddenly pulling back, and there's a lot of fear.
Well, there was a lot of fear in 1979 as well. I was actually on that trip after college. I was in Australia, I think, when 3 Mile Island blew. But the fear, it really did stop any kind of forward movement on trying to go to the next generation of nuclear power. That was a time when this country and South Africa and Germany were experimenting with new nuclear designs. The ones we have around us are mostly a relic of the early Cold War days. They're essentially the same thing that's in submarines powering them, just bigger. And then, as you say, so I don't see that there was a lot of acceptance. Things basically stopped for a long time. And then recently, because of concerns about global warming, I think there was rising interest in trying to restart nuclear power. And now this new accident has rekindled a lot of people's concerns. And it's appropriate in the sense that, boy, you want to be absolutely sure, not just 99% sure, but sure that the same thing can't happen at a nuclear power plant here. And one of the things that they were showing us today was the differences in the systems here. They have 3 different levels of backup generation to keep the pumps and going to keep the fuel cool. The complex is 50 feet, 90 feet above sea level instead of right at the shore. There can, even in the Atlantic Ocean, while it would never be the same kind of earthquake, you could have theoretically a tsunami generated by some of the activity across the Atlantic Ocean near Africa that could come up the Hudson River. And again, every plant is different. So it's good in a way that people are reviewing issues with existing plants. One thing that would be sad in a way is if this stops this sort of the beginning of what would be a new generation of refinement of designs that are so much more fundamentally unlikely to have anything that comes close to being like a meltdown. That would be unfortunate, I think, especially, again, if you care about climate change or energy security generally and you take nuclear off the table, it just makes the challenge of moving forward that much harder.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I know people are concerned about what do we do with the waste? What do we do with the question of safety as the plants are working? But the truth is we've got a bunch of aging dinosaurs in the United States and around the world. And it is good to be taking a second look and make sure that what we do have is safe for now and for the future. But I totally agree with you that what's going to be built, what we want to have built. I think there's something like somewhere between 30 or 50 plants that are in just the planning stage, where they're new design plants with new designs, nuclear plants, and they're just in the stage of gathering paperwork and trying to get past the regulations and get people to sign on the dotted lines so that they can start being built. And that's the hardest phase to get past, I think.
Yeah, and there are other realities to keep in mind. One is nuclear is ridiculously expensive. And it's not expensive just because it's dangerous. It's, it requires a lot of, it's just big and takes a huge amount of upfront money to develop a plant and to pass all the safety thresholds and to train 1,000 or more employees. The one I was at today at Indian Point, there was 1,100 people who work there. And so it's a huge enterprise, and that, if anything, will be the constraint that keeps nuclear moving forward. And there are, even now, a lot of subsidies for nuclear that aren't immediately obvious, one of which is essentially that a big chunk of the liability, if there were an accident at a plant, is really covered in the end by the government. Japan had an even more cushy setup that way, so it's not TEPCO, not Tokyo Electric Power, that's going to be on the hook for the enormous costs from what happened there, but the Japanese people.
And could possibly be an explanation.
Subsidies. Yeah, for sure. Why take extra care if you're covered essentially for the worst case? Why worry about the worst case?
Yeah. To move from nuclear power to the bigger question of, I guess, climate change, and also look at the anniversary of the Gulf oil spill. You did a lot of coverage last year on the Gulf oil spill. Do you think anything's changed? I mean, there's been a big call for, starting more, keeping drilling going, continuing drilling for oil. Do you think that any science has come back that's shown us, okay, the results of the accident? Do we know what kind of damage has been done? And do we also know, do we have the regulations? Are they being put in place to allow safer drilling in the future if we allow it? Two big different questions. But
yeah, in terms of ecological damage, I don't foresee there being any big surprises at this point. The one place to look to sort of assess the long-term prospect is at the Persian Gulf, where while this is the world's largest accident of this sort that we know of, the intentional release of oil into the Persian Gulf by Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War was the world's largest oil spill. And that ecosystem, essentially warm waters, tropical conditions, coral reefs, has come back in a very strong way. And it was starting to recover even a few years after that vastly larger oil release. So nature is capable of a lot of resilience. And keep in mind that the deep ocean ecosystem there are significant areas there where there are natural seeps of oil. So while there are certainly, fish and birds and other wildlife that was harmed badly by this, I don't foresee that being a big issue in the long haul. Now, the calamity was more socioeconomic and social. The people along the Gulf Coast there, even though shrimp fishing and other kinds of fishing aren't a giant industry, a multi-billion-dollar thing, they're an enormous cultural reality and part of the durable picture of that region. And that was a body blow for many communities there, and they'll be kind of recuperating for quite a long time. So in that sense, that's kind of my feeling about the overall scope of this disaster. The question of risk about whether this kind of drilling can or should go forward, whether BP should be allowed to do it again at all, what's up with deep water, whether there'll be criminal charges filed finally over the actual trials for the deaths of the 11 people who were killed on the rig. I see some good signs that the Mineral Mismanagement Service, as I called it in some of my blog posts, really is getting a thorough scrub. And the problem in these kind of arenas where you have an agency that's both responsible for promoting mineral extraction and regulating that's a bad mix. And there's some things the Department of Agriculture does that are the same way. And even the Energy Department is promoting fossil fuel extraction, even as it's working on the other end to come up with some technologies for limiting emissions. That always leads in ways that can be counterproductive. And it's up to people to not be lulled back into a sense of equanimity. One of the most enduring effective lines Obama has had in speeches the last few years has been, we have to get off of our shock to trance style of energy policy and energy awareness. And this gets back to that behavioral issue, the behavioral issues I was talking about before. It's fine to say that in a speech, but how do you actually get people to realize that there are really profound issues that rise through our deep dependence on oil and substantially unnecessary deep dependence on oil, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Obama was in San Francisco today, so my traffic was actually affected by his visit. He had some breakfast downtown that had downtown gridlocked. So in effect, a lot of people were wasting a lot of gas because he was in town, which I think is a little funny. But do you think, he made in the State of the Union address, he made a big statement. And I know last year, or at the beginning of this year as well, before the State of the Union, you were saying he needs to get a mind trust of people. He needs to get people to basically come up with some really good ideas, some direction, and then act on it. And do you think he's moving in that direction in any way?
It's such a tough, here he is already gearing up for the presidential race in 2012, knowing that everyone's eyes are still mainly on the economy and that new initiatives involving significant spending are not going to move in a meaningful way. Yeah. That's a bad mix. That's not the great time to be talking about, a great new push on energy action. I think you could think, well, there is a way to do it, but I just don't see that as being likely given the current politics. And what happens in 2012 is another question. If he were to win a second term, he would have the freedom that comes with a second term to push a little harder on things that he really cares about, the legacy issues. If a Republican were to win, it always depends on who the candidate is and whether the Tea Party phenomenon has legs, which it looks like that may not. A big question is about what will the face of the Republican Party be in 2012 coming into the election. If it moves toward the middle and you have a moderate, or even possibly progressive Republican vying for those independent voters, there could be a chance, if that person were to prevail, to push aggressively on energy, the way Richard Nixon pushed into China. That's been said. And there are ways for that to work. Now, again, all pie in the sky. No one really knows how that's going to play out.
Yeah, that's a little bit too far off in the future. I mean, we could get into maybe some of the prediction betting stuff and see how the markets can pick a winner, but I think that's still a little bit too far off. Yeah. There is looking for a few things online. I found the Heartland Institute, heartland.org, has you listed as an alarmist. The New York Times lead science correspondent Andrew Revkin acts as a megaphone for global warming alarmists, broadcasting their every far-fetched claim as if it were the gospel truth. He acknowledges that quote, there is no smoking gun in the climate change debate, and that, quote, for every PhD, there is an equal and opposite PhD. Yet he routinely dismisses any suggestion that climate change is not the man-made crisis he thinks it to be. What do you think about being defined in such a way?
Well, I won't paint a falsely equivalent picture, but there are certain liberal bloggers who say equally scandalous things about me.
Yeah.
ClimateProgress.org being a place that loves to hate the New York Times and doesn't seem to understand my approach to these issues. So that doesn't mean I feel I'm doing my job. I think there's some journalists who say, hey, if everybody hates me, then I must be effective.
Right.
I really don't define effectiveness that way. But I will say that our rhetoric, the discourse on issues like global warming has been owned way too long by polarizing voices that oversimplify things for the sake of getting attention or pulling at a durable, durable but small part of the populace. And what I mean by that is, and I wrote about this first way back in 2006. I did a piece called Yelling Fire on a Hot Planet, which is easy for people to Google for, that criticized both camps, the catastrophe camp and the hoax camp on global warming as sometimes being apt to, many times in some cases, being overstating their case. The idea that human-driven warming of the climate system, the idea that people are not capable of influencing this climate system in potentially profound ways is kind of, there's no way to say that that's something you could say reliably. And saying that climate is an unfolding catastrophe, that global warming right now is every extreme of weather that we see around us is our fault, essentially, is also equally untenable. There's so much work on what's called paleoclimatology, the climates of the past, that shows not long ago that even just centuries ago and millennia ago, there have been extraordinary upheavals in the climate system that dwarf even some things that we've seen lately that seem so dramatic. And also tornadoes, for example, there's no evidence of the kind of tornadoes that kill people, the F2 and above on the scale of tornado ferocity. There's no trend at all. So you can't, I think sometimes we have this lens of looking around us and looking with the eyes based on what we're thinking about that day, and it just isn't that simple. So catastrophe and hoax. And by the way, to interpret something as dangerous, to determine that a certain level of warming, a certain level of sea level change, certain odds of that are a catastrophe is pretty much a values judgment, not a scientific judgment. And in other words, it's uglier than that. People have to kind of hash that out. And too often the Heartland Institute or some progressive or liberal groups will kind of conflate what we know in the science and with what they want to do with policy. And the policy question is an entirely different debate, and one that's uglier innately because it involves that full range of human values and views and also entrenched interests that, not all of which are going to be honest about things.
Right. And like you said, there's going to be the dishonesty on both sides of the issue to push policy in the way that they'd like it to go, to be able to push it in a direction that's more favorable to themselves. And additionally, I've seen online, I mean, just looking at different interactions on blogs, comment threads, or in forums, it seems like people complain that denialists constantly use the same arguments over and over again. But I've seen the same arguments being brought up on the other side of it as well. So there is this, I guess it's a pattern where both sides have certain facts or certain arguments that they've learned, and they use those to try and counteract the other side's arguments, and then everything deadlocks. And you don't have anyone trying to find new information.
Yeah, and it's exasperating to me to see that, especially when the other thing that's been revealed through some of the social behavioral science is that there's a lot of things that people at those edges of the curve agree on. And I see this even reflected in .earth on the blog commentary. There are people who are fundamentally divergent views of climate science who drive Priuses and hate to waste energy. So, boy, what a thing to go to waste, to have people who agree on the need and the responsibility and opportunity in saving energy for all the benefits that come with that, to just get locked in some fight over how fast glaciers are going to melt. That I find very frustrating.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. It's there's a place in which progress can be made, where people can agree and things can be done to affect the United States, maybe even without policy changes taking place, that people can do things personally to save energy that trickle back to save energy for, and to save energy for the entire nation, and therefore maybe have less carbon dioxide. That's kind of nice. It's a nice side effect. But at the same time, like you said, they're stuck in the deadlock fight, and we want to get out of that somehow. Yeah,
it's again, what I try to do on the blog, I try to foster or create a sort of an environment where people can find those common find points of overlap, and not just argue from the edges. It's hard. The web is all an experiment, and I'm just trying to experiment with ways to foster productive discourse, and sometimes it all devolves back into some yelling and some not nice things. But I think it's I think there's signs that this can work out. And one thing I'm trying to do at Pace University is to build more of to work on building learning spaces online that are. In other words, an educational equivalent to .earth. So young people, while they're still forming their attitudes about the world, can start to, experiment with reaching out to people who they might feel are very different views on things.
Oh, that's interesting. So, in effect, creating a more collaborative environment for learning.
Yeah, very much so. And again, the other merit in crosstalk. So many new ideas come when disciplines or people with divergent views get together and share notes, share experiences, shave away at each other's ideas, put little pieces of information together that wouldn't come together otherwise.
Interesting. I love that. Good luck with that. I hope that goes very well, because we need more people sharing ideas, definitely. And we need more education. Teach the children, or they will lead the way, right?
Well, yeah, but what I love to see is not so much teach kids stuff, but foster an environment where they can learn to love learning. Yeah, and that's at every age. I did a piece on the blog not long ago. My wife was a science teacher for a long time, and middle school, and she and her teaching partner did this project every year with students where they had to build bridges out of balsa wood and then break them by adding weight to them until they failed, and whichever one lasted the longest was kind of a winner. But at the same time, they all had to analyze why their bridges broke and what they would do differently the next time. So they had to do it on a budget. They had to kind of, using fake money, they had to buy the wood. So they got points not only for durability, but also for economy, which is kind of like the real world. And there's this video I put on .earth. I think the post is called learning by breaking, or something like learning things by breaking things. And the video shows these kids the level of excitement in having this uncertainty in their learning, which is so different than memorizing a multiplication table or set of facts about history. And it's hard to build it into our education, but that's a fundamental root for me of sustainability, is making kids resilient and collaborative.
Yeah, and I can't say the number of times I've heard about people who have ended up going into science or engineering, that one of the first things they did to realize that they loved science or learning in general was take apart their parents' VCR, or take apart, find something and break it. Maybe they didn't put it back together, but they got to take something apart and see kind of how it worked. And there are a number of just people all over the world who have probably gone that route.
Yeah.
Learning by breaking is very important. I need to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. So if you just hold on for just a moment. I'd like to thank Netflix.com for sponsoring this hour of Dr. Kiki's Science Hour. Netflix.com. I'm going to see if I can get to my copy that somehow disappeared. I don't know where it went. I was going to read something. Anyways, Netflix.com has thousands of TV episodes and movies that you can stream to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. I do it at home all the time myself. You can also get DVDs by mail in about one business day if the DVD route is preferable to you. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit, TWIT. Additionally, you can watch thousands of TV episodes and movies. And I actually have a pick for this week. My pick of the week is Sanctuary. It's a science fiction, fantasy-ish program about different kinds of creatures on our planet, and the sanctuary group that allows them to flourish and survive, while at the same time studying them. It's an interesting series, not necessarily scientific all the time, but we like to have our suspension of disbelief every once in a while. So you can catch Sanctuary on Netflix and stream it instantly to your home. You don't have to wait for those DVDs to show up. I've watched it myself. I got to the end of the series, and I'm waiting for the next season to post currently so that I can watch more. I've got to watch more and find out what happens. Let's see. So instantly watch this TV show, or you can choose from all the other ones that they have available, other movies. Additionally, you can catch a movie like Hot Tub Time Machine. That's a pretty good movie. Again, not very scientific, but fun. And you can watch all this stuff when you register for a free trial membership. Go to Netflix, netflix.com/twit, TWIT, and be sure to sign up for your free trial. We thank Netflix for their support of Twit. Now back to the show. I found another interesting post online this week talking about science and the facts or the ideas that people put up. And there's a What's Up With That is one of the website out there that this week, April 18th, there was a post saying that Revkin of the New York Times takes back his statement that skeptics are more knowledgeable about the science. And so there's a quote that was in your blog that was disappeared, now replaced by, quote, "I've removed a line I'd tacked on here that gave too simplistic a summary of the Six Americas study." And then they grab a little tiny excerpt from the Six Americas study to support their own side of things. But we can talk about this and maybe what went into your removing that line, and how you feel about their interpretation of that removal.
Yeah, a reader challenged the way I had summarized it, because the whole report is online and you could look through it. Yeah. And essentially, what I had written was not correct. Sometimes I'll put in a modification of something I wrote, and with a little asterisk and stuff. Frankly, I didn't have time. So I put in an explainer and said, what I wrote earlier really was way too nuanced. In reality, this study showed that there are other aspects of the science on climate change that people who are worried about it know better than people who are not worried about it or skeptical about it. So I would have to write several paragraphs. I'm a busy guy. I'm trying to work on a big writing project for the National Academy of Sciences. I'm trying to teach 2 courses. So I just deleted it. If they want to make fun of me or get some mileage out of Revkin censoring something, that's fine with me. I don't really care.
You're like, whatever. And
Life is too short.
Exactly. It sounds like you're really busy. I know that you were really busy reporting and blogging for the New York Times, and that you moved into this position at Pace University so you could have a little more time for writing those longer projects. How's that working out for you?
I'm busier than I ever was by far. I'm a little more sane, even though I'm busier, because the one element that's no longer in my life is that specter of when a tsunami hits the Japanese coast, I'm not on an airplane and saying goodbye to my family for a while. When there were a number of times through my 15 years at the Times when I was gone for weeks because of some breaking news. The first time was not even about the environment. It was the crash of Flight 800 off Long Island. Because I was a science writer and knew something about gadgets, that I was immediately wrangled up to be one of the people writing about the investigation of what happened to that plane, and 9/11 and the other issues. Last year after I left the Times, when the Gulf oil spill happened, that was the first time. That was the first big news event that I kind of didn't have to immediately. I started writing about it immediately, but I didn't have to disrupt my life completely. And I'm now 55 years old, and kind of like there comes a time when you do want to have a little sanity, and I just shifted gears, and you give up some things with that, but at the same time, again, my life has never been busier. It's just a little more. There's a little of the edge is gone.
Do you think it's, or do you find yourself focusing more on the personal interactions that you have with your students and this kind of smaller, more intimate academic setting than, say, when you're writing for a broad general audience? Do you find that that you're treating things differently?
I love working with students. I had taught journalism before, quite a while ago, and then I taught at Bard College a seminar on communication and the environment, and I love experimenting in the classroom. And for that stuff I did at Bard, was graduate students, and I split them up at one point to try to emphasize this challenge that scientists face when they get into the public arena of just conveying their science or getting involved in talking about policies that they care about as human beings, because every scientist, believe it or not, is actually a human being as well.
Really?
Not everybody. Yeah, well, you might be aware of this. And but some, and so what they had to do was they had to defend two different people in the climate wars. One was Susan Solomon, who in 2007 was the chairwoman of the co-chair of the IPCC, the Climate Panel Report on Science, and Jim Hansen, who's become a very passionate activist, as well as being a much lauded scientist studying global warming. And the class had to split into two groups to kind of defend both approaches. And afterwards, I asked them, secretly, like, well, if you had to choose one of those people ahead of time, which would you have chosen to be a champion of? And they virtually all liked the Jim Hansen approach. But after they went through the exercise, they realized there are significant issues that come when you move from science into advocacy. And this is something else I've written on the blog about a few times.
Yeah.
So that, again, I like that kind of experiment. I like having, I think in this century, any graduate level and many undergraduate experiences, if they're still the old-fashioned me standing at a podium, giving a lecture, I don't think that's going to that doesn't fit the skill set I would like them to develop. It has to be more exploratory, where we're all exploring together. I'll give you one example. Right now, I'm co-teaching a course I just came into Pace this year, so it's an existing peak course in how to make documentary film. And every year it's some different subject. This year they're doing it on shrimp aquaculture, shrimp farming. And for the spring break, the students went to Belize. I got to go with them, which was fantastic. Teacher, and we're finishing a really neat film on efforts to grow shrimp and while cutting environmental harms. It's going to be a really cool bit of movie making, but it's fundamentally collaborative, and where we're co-creating this thing. It's not. It's just great.
Yeah, and the students are learning at the same time that they're creating this product. Right. They're getting that wonderful collaborative experience, and hopefully will go on to do more. I guess I want to bring us back a little bit as we get toward the end of the hour. Bring us back a little bit toward the Earth Day theme of things. Is there anything that you think that we need to be focusing on, that people should, or is Earth Day something that people should be thinking about or focusing on? Is it something that is helpful in your view?
Yeah, I think so. In a way, on my blog, amid all of the posts that I write that are somewhat technical or looking at issues that are breaking in the world right now about what's going on with the radiation from Japan, or some new dispute about climate policy, once in a while I try to stick on a piece that's just about the fact that the skunk cabbage in the woods just poked its head out of the leaf litter here where I live. And or just the other day for the memorial of the Gulf spill, I decided not to do yet another piece analyzing the broad implications of this thing, and just put up a picture of this wonderful little ceramic bell that a neighbor of mine hung in the woods here a few years ago, as a way of, and a silent bell. The clapper doesn't really hit the side, so it struck me as somehow resonant for me about the losses of the 11 lives. That we don't, again, in all the debate about oil policy, we forget that there were 11 people whose lives were lost and families whose lives were wrecked by what happened. And it just seems simpler and more appropriate. And so in that way, Earth Day to me is a moment for people to hopefully take a walk in their environment, whether it's what Thoreau. One thing I love to try to talk to people about is the history of understanding that the environment, which we too often, I think, have in our heads as the wilderness, is what's around us, and there's a way to improve every little part of it in a small way, including very much the human environment. And the person I think about most along these lines is Rene Dubose, who, when I was in college in the 70s, I read every book, and I got to interview him just before he passed away in 1981. And he's the one who said, think globally, act locally. But I think his much more powerful message was simply that a human environment can be a beautiful and productive and ecologically rich place, even if people have been deeply modifying it. And if there's one thing we need to get comfortable with in this century, it's the reality that the world is increasingly what we choose to make it, not just through greenhouse gases, and a lot of it's out of our control. We've put pythons in the Everglades, and
Right.
and they're having a really good time there, as I've written a few times. And so we have to kind of just, to some extent, we have to get over ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to embrace the reality that for this part of the Earth's journey, it's very much a human artifact, and to make the best of that as it relates to our own aspirations and also our ethical, thinking.
I'm going to try and go out and appreciate the parrots in San Francisco. Those are definitely
There
here
you
as
go,
a result
exactly.
of human activities. Yeah. I think that's a positive way to think about it, because so often there's a combative spin put on environmentalism. And if you think about it simply as your environment or the environment, and not necessarily as trying to force any one viewpoint on any person, but try and get across that general appreciation of this is where you live, or this is the area that's adjacent to where you live, or this is the area where animals live or where somebody else lives. Try and put those pieces together eventually, but you have to start somewhere. Definitely.
Right.
Yeah. And I also know that you're a musician. So do you have any favorite Earth Day type tunes that you can suggest for people's listening pleasure tomorrow?
Well, I don't know if I have time, but I could grab my guitar.
That would be fun.
Well, there's one on my website. There's a post, if you Google for Seeger, as in Pete Seeger, and Revkin, and Dot, you'll find a song I wrote about our fossil fuel love affair that I think says a lot. It's called Liberated Carbon. And there's a photo of me playing with Pete Seeger, which I get to do once in a while. And it's a wonderful experience, needless to say.
Oh, that's gotta be great. Yeah, I think I read in an interview, you said you changed some of the lyrics of that song at one point.
Yeah, folk music is always evolving. So I don't feel uncomfortable about that. There was a line, when I first wrote it years ago, I had in my head, when you write a song, you kind of have a framing. And my frame of reference was that of the environmentalist. And it had a line about Satan's black label, meaning gasoline. And recently, as I said, my thinking has evolved over the years in terms of when I look at our fossil fuel habit, I don't say, woe is me, so much as, boy, we were enjoying something that seemed pretty fundamentally enjoyable. And now science is revealing that this comes with lots of, not just science, but, the reality of coal mining, the reality of what can happen with oil production. Gives us a broader sense now that there are externalities that we hadn't really considered, even as we got very prospered as a society, and our wealth and our technology and our agriculture grew around these fuels. So I modified that line to it's still got a bit of a twist to it. It's now it's set, instead of Satan's black label, I think it's OPEC's black label. So I'm still kind of poking a finger at somebody, but.
And every time there's somebody to poke a finger at, you can change the lyric if you need to.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I did last summer. I might have sung it at least once, saying BP's black label.
Nice. Can people, do you perform often? Can people in the New York, New Jersey area find you playing at any open mic nights or anything if they're in the area?
I wish I had more time. I'll be playing at the Clearwater Festival on the Hudson River, on the boat, the Clearwater. The band I'm in, Uncle Wade, we play every June on the Clearwater. We're kind of the boat band, which is really fun. And other than that, myspace.com/Andy Revkin, Revkin, and myspace.com/Uncle Wade.
Awesome. And people out there, you can also find Andrew Revkin at the .earth blog, which is NewYorkTimes.com, nytimes.com/.earth. You can also find him on Twitter at Revkin. So he's a prolific Twitterer as well. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun. It's been really great to meet you and to get to speak with you about stuff that you've been thinking about and working on for so long and so intently.
Well, thanks for having me on. It was really fun.
It was fun. And I wish you good luck with your educational academic adventures. I'd love to hear more about the collaboration projects that you're working on. I think that would be
okay.
Sounds very interesting.
We'll stay in touch.
Thank you. I hope so.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you. Have a great evening. And this has been Dr. Kiki's Science Hour. Thank you very much for joining us here this evening. And again, many thanks to Andy Revkin from the .earth blog for joining us to discuss and celebrate Earth Day. Hopefully everyone out there will take a moment tomorrow to appreciate and enjoy your surroundings. Take a look around you at the environment and go, this is the Earth. This is where I live. Let's make it nice. We can make these things nice. We have potential, and we have the capabilities with our hands, with our minds, to be able to change our environment and make it what we want it to be. So I hope everyone out there takes a moment to think about that a little bit tomorrow in honor of Earth Day. I'm Dr. Kiki, and yes, this has been Dr. Kiki's Science Hour. Be sure to tune in next week. Our guest is going to be Josh Rosenau from the I can't remember what the acronym means again. Oh dear. NCSE, National Something for Science Education, National Committee? I'm blanking on it, but NCSE, to discuss what or what is or isn't a scientific controversy, and probably to talk a lot about what's going on in evolution at the political school fronts these days. You can find me online. I'm Dr. Kiki on Facebook and also on Twitter. And you can subscribe to Dr. Kiki Science Hour in iTunes. And you can also go back and find past episodes of this show at twit.tv/Kiki. Please subscribe. We like you subscribing. It helps the numbers. Thanks for tuning in once again. All I ask is 1 hour a week. I hope it makes your world a whole lot more interesting. Bye.